Okay, we're making good progress on this. So, first thing I actually want to do is, let's see, border radius is, let's make this look a little bit prettier because it's already starting to look pretty. Let me close some of these. And let's give this a border radius. Add it here. Did that give me a, did that make that rounded? Column rounded. Border radius. Maybe it did. Did it? Do I have to add the rounded to the parent class? It's very hard to tell. Okay, I think it gave it a rounded corners. It's just, it's subtle. Like the B in that word. Or something. Okay. Yep, it gave it a radius. Just, maybe we want to actually, do you want to give it an actual border? Border light. See what that looks like. It's very subtle, huh? Oh, I think it's because it's the same color as the background. So what if we do secondary instead? See what that looks like? I might be getting into the weeds a little bit. But yeah, let's not worry about the border. Too much. Let's keep it subtle. So we were going to add the logic for shuffle. I guess before we do that, let's add logic to make our center bubble look a little bit different. And I think I want to make this configurable so we can have like different variants of this game. Maybe we have variants where we make some of these letters required, but not all of them. So let's do that. We might have a variant where we don't care about, we're not going to require any of these letters. We might have a variant where we require the center one. Might have one where we require a random one, or a few of them. So this is something I didn't do in the other versions we did. I didn't have the notion of making this required letter configurable. So there's a few ways we can do this. Let's do this. Equals zero is standard. Let's do 1 is easy. Do I want to do it this way? Let's see. Does that want to be an enumerator? I can do it this way. I think that works. I could use an enumerator to have our different like variant types. I think making it an object is fine. Might be better to make it an enum. So runtime differences. Let me look at this. just kind of get a sense of how we interact with this. That's a reserved word. I'm trying to make one. Oh, it's okay. We're looking at TypeScript. But what does that compile into? Yeah, I forgot JavaScript doesn't, out of the box, have this data type. This might work. I'm just thinking about how I want to actually save this. One sec. Just let me noodle on it. Okay, so I took a little break. I wanted to find a way of kind of breaking my code up into modules without actually relying on like JavaScript modules. Since this isn't a Node application, this is just a simple static app for now. I decided that the easiest thing to do would be just to add a couple of extra JavaScript classes to kind of simulate what this would look like if, we were breaking this up into logical, classes or modules. And then all I've got is, on the HTML side, I'm just calling those two extra scripts before I'm using them in bubbletrouble.js, okay? And then this was just testing it. So if I look at the config, this is supposed to be the configuration for this app. You can see the variant I'm using is easy mode. And then here all I'm doing is I wanted to see, to test and see if it recognizes which mode I'm using, right? So if the variant is easy mode, then just log easy mode. And the reason I'm doing this is we want to change whether or not we're making this middle button required. That depends on what mode we're playing on. Okay, so let's change this mode to variant.standard, and you can see now it's logging standard mode. Okay. So, what do we want to do? Let's have a method configure game mode. Let's see, config game mode options. Let's say that. And we'll have a function. Get rid of this. I was just testing stuff. So you can ignore that. Config game mode options. And we'll have our switch in here. If the game mode is standard, which this is, what do we want to do? Well, really, we would have probably some other scripts that exist for all of these separate game modes. And we would just call a separate script that does all of the special game mode logic. But for now, let's just have it here in this. We could just have a method that exists in this bubbletrouble.js that does all of that. So what do you want to call this? If the game mode is standard, let's do init standard game. If it's easy, we'll do init easy game. Making it easy. Okay. So we'll add another function here, function init standard game, and make sure that this is called standard game. Great, that's called. So when we first load this, we populate everything that we know we need regardless of the game mode, and then we then load the game mode specific code. So since this is a standard game, what do we want to do? We want to make this button a different color. And let's add another class to that. Well, that might be one and the same. So let's try that first. So if it's a standard game, what do we want to do? We want to grab the middle button or middle bubble and make it a certain color, right? Okay. So let's come up with a way of making sure we're just grabbing that middle button. So remember, middle bubble rather. So if I do this, this grabs all of the objects of that share that class, right? So if I were to do like grab 3, that does indeed grab our middle bubble, but we want a way of making sure we're getting the middle bubble. And that is dependent on our config, our bubble count. So let's do this. So if it's a standard game, let's do bubble. Well, I might be able to do it here in the browser directly first. So how do we get this 3? We can do config. Well, let me look at what that config object looks like first. So I've got config.bubbleCount. Let's try this. Let's try math.floor bubble count divided by 2. So 7 divided by 2, 3.5. The floor is 3. This will at least work for odd numbers, right? Oop. Oh, it's because I need config.bubbleCount. Config.bubbleCount divided by 2. And that does indeed give us our center bubble. Yay. So what I actually want to do is just have a helper function that's get well, let's follow the same pattern we were using where we're using camel case instead of Pascal case, right? Get middle bubble. And what do we want? Okay. And if this is actually going to return a jQuery object, let's prefix it with the this dollar sign, so we know that this is actually going to give us a jQuery object, right? The floor. Let's wrap this in the. So make sure it has the jQuery wrapper, right? Because remember, this will just return the DOM element itself. If we want access to all those jQuery methods, we have to give the jQuery wrapper. So if we're initializing the standard game, what we want to do is call, get middle bubble dot add class. Well, first let's call, what class do we have on it? I guess I can look at it and see right here, right? We've got BG primary. So let's say we want to change that to warning. Okay, so let's remove the class bg primary, and add the class bg danger. And that didn't work. And the reason is I'm missing my config here. Config.bubbleCount. Oh, and instead of danger, let's do warning. Oops. Okay, there we go. What happens if we have an even number of bubbles? So if we change the config to 4. That's unexpected. I was expecting, so this get middle bubble count, so 4. Let's try this. Yeah, that gives us 2. Okay, I guess 0, 1, 2. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I was expecting it to be this one, the U in this case, not the third one. That's fine. I think if we wanted to play the standard variant with an even number of bubbles, then that's fine. That's something we can do. I was thinking of making it so you can't do this variant with an even number of bubbles, but it's all configured here. It's all configurable. So for whatever reason, we want a variation that is an even number of bubbles with this standard game mode, then fine. That's, whoever's running this can do that. So great. The center bubble is has a different color now. Now we need to make sure that when we are shuffling this, we are shuffling around the center one. So we'll do that in the next one. Okay, this is really coming along. Cool. So we just added this notion of game modes, which it might not look like we did a whole lot, but we actually did accomplish quite a bit in that last one, making this configurable. So we can scale this and potentially add different game modes in the future, right? So now that we did that, and we have this notion of a center bubble. I'm using those interchangeably at this point. We can work on the shuffle logic. So let's go back here and add. Let's move this around so that these click events appear in the order we're actually seeing them. I think that makes a little bit more sense, right? So left to right corresponds with top down. So shuffle dot on click. What do we want to do? We need a method for shuffling. Yeah, okay. Shuffle bubbles, right? So function, shuffle bubbles. So what do we want to do? We want to shuffle the order of the letters in this array, and then call this populate bubbles with letters function again, right? So let's do that. So we know that we'll want to call populate bubbles with letters. But before we do that, let's find a good way of shuffling this array. So let's see. Seems like there's a pretty common use case for this. So there's a good chance that this function already exists. There's no need to figure out how to do this ourselves if it's relatively simple. And somebody's already done it, right? So let's look that up. JavaScript array swap positions. I've already looked this up. Or no, that's swapping. Let's see. Shuffle array. So how to randomize shuffle a JavaScript array. Great. So there's one with lots of upvotes. Here's a function to do exactly that. So let's grab the content of this function and just throw it in here, right? But let's replace the references to array with our random letter array. Which we could just do, actually no, we want to, there we go, do it right there. And see if that works. So, pick a remaining element, swap it with the current element. Okay, great. Let's see if that works. So actually what I want to do is log, oops. There we go. The random letter array. Just to see what it looks like, make sure that this shuffle function that we just grabbed from Stack Overflow is actually doing what we expect it to do. Okay. Looks like it's doing exactly what we wanted. It's shuffling it. Of course, one problem we have is the middle letter is getting shuffled, and because we're on the standard game mode, we don't want that to happen. So let's go back to the shuffle bubbles method, and let's say, let's do this. If config dot variant equals variance dot standard, we're fine with the shuffle, but we want to undo part of it. And namely, what we want to do is, actually, okay, good. I was looking at the console here, and it looks like it is actually updating the bubbles up here too. So it's great. So if we're on this variant, we want to preserve the letter that we care about, and make sure that we're putting that back in the middle. So let's see. So how do we want to do this? First, I think when we first load this game, let's see. Populate random letter array. When we first populate the random letter array, that would be a good time to, if we're on that special game mode, to keep track of that prime letter that we care about. So let's do if config.variant equals variance dot standard, and that's equals. Let's do var center letter equals nothing for now. We'll say center letter equals, and what were we using here? So we'll use the same logic to get the middle letter, equals letter, boom, okay. So first let's make sure that worked, that this centered letter exists. Okay, I saw it was X. Now it's B. Good. So we've got a notion of a center letter. Great. So go back here to our shuffle bubbles function. And all we're going to do is we're modifying this array. We're shuffling the array. But before we actually call populate bubbles with letters, we want to switch the array a little bit. So make sure that the letter we care about is maintaining its position in the array, staying in the middle. Okay? So what we really want is a function to swap array elements. And what we want to do is we want to find the index that our center letter is in now that it's been shuffled, and then find the index of the middle of the center, and then just swap those two. So let's look up how to do that. JavaScript array swap positions, swapping two items. So this was accepted as the answer, but this one has quite a few more upvotes, and I see why. And I like the fact that they're adding this new function to the actual array prototype so that we can call swap items directly on an array. So for example, let's go back to document. If I make an array here, A, comma, B, you'll see if I do try and call swap items and do 1, comma 2, it's going to yell at me. It doesn't recognize that function. And it would actually be, it would be 0 and 1. It doesn't know what that function is. It doesn't exist. So here we can add the function to that prototype, and now call swap items again, and it works. Great. So let's add this function, and now we can call random letter array dot swap items, and this is supposed to be the center, and then the next value is supposed to be the current position of the center letter. Right? So how do we get the center item? We've got a function to do it, or we've got a method to do it anyways, which is this math floor blah 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 blah, right? Which really what I should be doing is get middle bubble index. I want to switch this up. Get middle bubble index, and what we want, because this is the part that we're actually reusing, right? Return math.floor, blah, blah, blah. And then where we were calling get middle bubble, what we should now call is bubble get middle bubble index. Oops, got to remove class because this is the part that we're reusing, right? Get middle bubble index, which we're also using it up here, right? Get middle bubble index. And we're using it here, get middle bubble index. And then we want the new index of our center bubble. So let's call random letter r dot get index center letter. Okay, let's see how that works. We got problems. I changed too many things without testing. Bubble get middle bubble. Blah, blah, blah. Let me try calling this dot bubble. Oh, you know what? Got to preserve that jQuery wrapper. That's why. Eureka! So now let's see. So remember, when I hit shuffle, recall shuffle bubbles, which shuffle are, which shuffles that array, and then this preserves the center bubble. So let me just save that. And then this updates the UI. GetIndex is not a function. Am I not? Random letter R? Or sorry, it's index at, isn't it? Yeah. Getting tired. Oh, it's index of. Not at. Index of. I'm getting tired. Now let's shuffle it. Okay, great. So we've got MXDYASP. MXDASYP. It's shuffling and it's keeping the center letter, but more importantly, or as importantly, I guess, it's keeping the center letter in place only because we've specified the game mode that we're using. So what if we change the variant to easy? What if we change the variant to easy? Now, let's see. Oh, it's yelling at us because this init easy game mode doesn't exist, and we're calling it, when we're calling the config game mode options, this init easy game doesn't exist. So let's make it just a placeholder. Easy game, right? And let's just make a console. Let's just log something that says that, you know, this method hasn't been implemented. Method not implemented. But if I shuffle it, it's not preserving the center letter, so that's awesome. So we just finished our shuffle logic, and we're taking the game mode into consideration. Very cool. Okay, let's take inventory real quick. Let's see how much progress we've made. So if I click on these bubbles, I populate our display here, our what did we even call it? Our letter assembly line, right? If I hit delete, I'm removing those letters. If I hit refresh, I change the random letters that we're working with. If I hit shuffle, it does just that. So one thing that I want to do is quickly, if we hit refresh, what's nice about this is because we're breaking everything into logical units, i.e. functions, it's easy to know, like, if I need to add something, where exactly we should add it, right? So I know when I hit refresh, I want to clear the letter assembly line. So let's look here. Okay, here's our refresh button. When we click refresh, populate random letter array, good. Populate bubbles with letters. Let's also clear letter assembly line. That function obviously doesn't exist yet, so let's go ahead and add that. Clear LAL. And in order to do that, let's see if we can't copy some code. So there's refresh LAL. which we might. Ooh. Okay, good. We are still reading from the LAL word. Great. Remember, we don't want to just update the HTML directly. We want to update this word that we're using as kind of our driver for everything. And by driver, I mean like this is the state that we care about. But there might be multiple components on this page that care about what this text is. For example, once we actually submit it, we want to read this word. The display here should read from this variable. And once we actually submit it and determine that it's a valid word, then this secondary window should read from this variable too. So storing this in a variable makes more sense than here. Let me see if this is a good use case for the Photoshop, right? So let's see what makes more sense. What makes more sense? No. Huh. Evidently a tablet that doesn't work makes sense. I'm using Bluetooth on it, so it sometimes doesn't like the Bluetooth. So one sec. Well, the driver for the tablet's not working. I have to restart to get it to work again. So I'm not going to worry about that. Hopefully, you understand why having the content of this, letter assembly line saved in this variable makes more sense than and having everything read from that, including this display. Hopefully that makes sense. So that being said, I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, we were working on this method, clear LAL. So what we want to do now is LAL word equals nothing. And now let's just call refresh LAL. Should be that simple. Great. So once again, if this was like a React component, all we would have to do is update the state. If this were a stateful value, then we would just update the value, and then automatically everything that cares about that state would update. So the next thing is pretty much the last thing, right? Which is actually submitting the word and making sure that that's a valid word. So let me change this game mode back to standard real quick because that's what I prefer to play with. And that's a bit tricky. So I guess in this one we can just talk about how we want to implement that, or what needs to happen to make sure it's a valid word. So in the other version, where I implemented this, I was calling the Merriam-Webster API, where you just pass in the word you're trying to test and your unique API key, and it'll spit back a response. And the response, if it's a valid word, will have this short definition array. And if that exists, I know that it's a valid word. So that was a perfectly fine way of testing to make sure the word was indeed a word, right? So for this, we can call that again and implement this in a very similar way, but it might also be interesting to think about a more permanent solution. And a better solution might be, once the page first loads, so let's go back here. Once the page first loads, or I guess once we get our list of 7 letters, it would be nice to have our own API where we just feed in, an array of letters, or a string, right? Because that's exactly what a string is. We give it a string of letters, and the API would spit back a list of valid words for all those letters, right? Which is similar to what the New York Times game was doing, right? So if we look here, that's exactly what it's doing. Which, let's actually see. Let me full screen this, and let's see what we're doing. Let's look at the network when we first load this page. How are we populating that object, right? So let's see what we're doing. Okay. So here's a GET request with this user. Let me organize it by type. It's giving us a 400 error. So it's probably not these 400 errors. We can at least look at the body. Yep, unauthorized, bad request. What's in here? Nothing. So I'm not sure how it's actually populating this. Look at that object again, this game data object with today's answers. But it might be more efficient long-term to do something similar. That way, every time someone tries to enter a word, we're not constantly bombarding the server with these simple, API calls. It would be much more efficient to ping the server once and then just save the list. Obviously, the downside of that is people like me can go in and see what that list looks like, because we're sending it to the client. We're doing all of this validation on the client side. So I'm just going to look real quick and see if I can't figure out how it's actually updating this list. Okay, so there it is. So this page just has a script that injects this game data object into the window. I guess it adds this game data property to the window object. And they must have logic on the server that just dynamically changes what this script looks like depending on the day, right? So there's probably a better way of doing that. I still like the idea of making an API call only one time, and then saving that list of valid words somewhere, so that when we are actually trying to enter a word like eggnog and do that comparison, we're not making another API call necessarily. So really, the best way of doing this, so we're not sending that unencrypted list directly to the browser, so it's visible within the browser, the actual list of answers. We could save this list in like a Redis cache or something, so every single day when we're coming up with our new list of letters, we make one API call, and that API call just takes in the list of letters and spits back a JSON object with all the valid words like this, and we save that JSON object in like a Redis cache, and then the browser, when they actually hit enter, so we'd still be making an API call, but we're making an API call to the Redis cache rather than another API like Merriam-Webster's API, and especially not making an API call to like a database, which is what Merriam-Webster would be doing anyways. We're not making an API call to a database to see if that's a valid word. We're making a call to a tiny, tiny list of words that we've already determined are valid, which will be much, much faster and more efficient than making an API call every single time. So we might try doing it that way. We'll see for the next video. All right.